I'm in my very, very messy garage, and I suspect that if you have vintage motorcycles, you have the same exact problem that I do. The problem is that even though this bike, and that bike are all super fun to ride, only one of them runs, and it's that little one, the pit bike. It's because it's new. It's not vintage like the rest of them. And even though I like working on vintage motorcycles, I just want to have one. I just want to have one I can ride all the time that runs. So I came up with a solution. This is my modern to vintage bike build. For the last 3 years, all I've owned is vintage motorcycles. I've ridden a lot of modern motorcycles, but this one is the one that I've chosen to buy and replace all of my vintage motorcycles with. You might say it doesn't look as cool as a vintage motorcycle, and you'd be right. Even without its graphics and its color scheme of just black and white, it still looks like the same people who designed Power Rangers or maybe RV graphics made this bike. So I've decided that I'm going to change that. I started by removing all of the plastics. I lifted the bike up, clipped off any zip ties that I could reach, and then used my impact to take the rest of the bolts off that I could also reach. Some people don't like that. They say that you can break things, but I was gentle, and it seemed to work out all right. There were a few bolts that I couldn't reach with the impact, so for those I used my open-end 10mm wrench. It took a while, but I got all of the external plastics off, and then moved to taking the fuel tank off. I started with the radiator shrouds and then the main bolt holding the tank, but of course I forgot to take the fuel hose off. I grabbed some needle nose pliers, took the fuel hose clamp off, and made sure to turn off the fuel. After that, it came right off. I also had to remove the air filter, which was super greasy with the filter oil, so I put on some gloves for that. Then it was time for a wash. After the bike was fully clean, it was back into the garage to mask up around the triple crown of the fork. Those are red, and I want them to be black. So these are my paints of choice. It's what I have. This is an engine enamel, which is high heat, so definitely overkill, and a rusty metal primer, which is also overkill, but like I said, it's what I have. We're gonna roll with it. Painted on several light coats of the primer, waiting about 15 minutes between coats, and then did the same with black paint. While that dried, I moved on to what I thought was going to be the hardest part, fitting the brand new vintage reproduction plastics from an 80s enduro bike. I really didn't know where to start with this, so first things first, just start smooshing it on there, and then stand back and see if it looks right. Not sure how I'm going to attach that, but I think it might work. I used a hairdryer to kind of heat up the plastic and hopefully get it to mold in there. When that didn't go well, I actually used the zip tie to hold it in place. You're going to see me smack this seat on about 1,000 times, so get used to that shot. More of the hairdryer, more smooshing, and when I think I got it close, I decided to mark out where the holes go and drill those in so that I could bolt it down and hopefully have it cool while in the right spot. After the paint dried on the lower triple crown, it was time to do the top. So I removed the handlebars, pushed those out of the way, and then masked that up to get ready for paint. These plastics didn't come with a taillight. After some searching, I found this one at a scooter supply store of all places. Other than being LED, it's a perfect match for the look that was on these 80s enduro bikes. The plastics don't come drilled for anything, so I had to drill the holes for the mounting block, and I used this piece of tape to get the alignment perfect, and then I needed to drill another hole where the plug for the wiring would go. I just used the blue painter's tape to trace everything, and it was a perfect fit. I let the paint dry for a couple of days, then pulled all of the masking tape and remounted the handlebars. Found this light online and had to buy these rubber bits, but it fits, well, you'll see, it fits perfectly. I think one of the hardest parts of this build was finding parts that fit my bike and match the look I was going for. This one, I think I ordered 3 or 4 headlights from different small vendors before I finally found one that fit and matched the fenders I'd bought. After drilling a couple holes off screen, I mounted up the front fender, checked the clearance, and tightened it down. This is when things started to get exciting because look how good that looks. I did a couple of random things like tighten up the taillight and run the wire, but then it was time to mount the fuel tank. This fuel tank is actually an extended range fuel tank built for this model, I think by Clark. It's just black, it's not exactly vintage, but it does have kind of a 1980s look about it that I thought would work well for the first version of this build. I put the fuel hose on and tightened it with a socket and wrench this time, not pliers, and then tightened up the rest of the tank. One last little breather hose to install, and the tank was on. I transferred over this seat catch screw from the original tank onto the new tank, and then before I put the seat on, I temporarily wired up the headlights and the taillight. Later, off camera, I soldered and shrink wrapped these for a permanent connection. I put the seat on and then went to adjusting the color temperature of the license plate light portion of the taillight. First, I added some red to get rid of the blues, but it was just too purple. The goal here is to warm up that light so it looks like an incandescent bulb, not an LED. So I decided to add some yellow on top of the red, hopefully getting kind of a yellow-orange look. When I tried it, you couldn't really see it in the daylight, but I tested it at night and it looked great. After shaping the rear fender with a hairdryer and that taking forever, I decided to go to a butane torch. I was concerned it might ruin the finish on the front of the plastics, so I torched the back of them and found that it didn't change the finish at all and was way faster. Now, for the sake of the video, I made this look like I just fit it up, but it literally took me days to get the right fit and the right shape. Then I drilled a hole that matched with the original mounting points of the original plastic and bolted it on. The part of the airbox that was covered by the previous plastics was kind of sticking out, so I just took a knife and trimmed that little bit right off. I kept doing this on each individual plastic part, right side and left side, just fitting them, shaping them around the muffler, and then eventually drilling holes to fit with the original mounting points. I found the technique of blowing compressed air onto the hot panel after I heated and shaped it, kind of locked it into shape. So the seat didn't look vintage, but instead of shaping a new seat to match the vintage look, I put on a sheepskin cover that I had from a different bike that just ties on temporarily until I can do something else that looks more vintage. Got these graphics. That one has some holes cut out that I don't need, but we'll work with it. Side panel and a side panel. Let's put these on. Should have a nice pop of color. Installing vinyl is super tricky and kind of a one-shot, one-go situation. I taped it on with blue painter's tape and then shaped it as close as I could with scissors before trimming it again with a razor blade and then squeegeeing it on. I did this on all of the panels and man, it is nerve-wracking. It took me forever, but in the end, I think it turned out okay. Before removing the paper backing and sticking the vinyl down permanently, I cleaned the plastics with some degreaser to get rid of my hand marks, then sprayed it with some soapy water and gently laid the vinyl on there, trying my best not to wrinkle or mess up each vinyl piece. Just like shaping the plastics, this process took forever. And I actually tried to take it into somebody who lays graphics and get these graphics made so that they wouldn't have this little hole there. But because it was such a small job, nobody wanted to do it. I called a couple of people and I just couldn't get on the schedule. And I think that's probably because this would only be $100 or $200 when they're used to wrapping cars for $3,000 to $4,000. So that meant that I had to do it myself, and the best way for me to do that was just to go slow and peel it up if it wasn't fitting. With the vinyls done and everything looking good, I decided that my next move would be to actually make a full seat cover out of sheepskin. I bought this sheepskin from Amazon for I think around $68, and I was just going to trace it and cut it to fit, then staple it directly over the old seat cover. As with everything on this bike, I've never done this before, so I just took my time, made sure that I stretched it tight, and put probably way too many staples in there. All of that extra fur underneath the seat was going to make it really hard to install, so I got our dog shaver and shaved a lot of it off. I guess I'm a certified animal groomer now. I cut the excess off, added a few more staples, and this seat was ready to go. This sheepskin will patina, get a little dirty, get a little dready, and will look really, really neat. My goal was to make it look kind of like the seat covers that I saw on the touring bikes in the National Geographics my parents had from the 80s and the 70s. With the build coming to an end, the last thing I added was some bark busters to keep my levers intact. That's a modern bike is a vintage build. It's got a couple of things that need to be finished, like I need a graphic on the tank here, which I'm waiting for, and I'm sure there'll be some other things. Eventually I'll put a metal tank on here. But for now, this is the final build. Oh, I'm so excited. Let's go stare at it and then test drive it. So if you really wanted a vintage bike, this isn't it. It's got disc brakes and not two shocks on the back, but if what you really want is to ride, not work on your bike, here's one of these. It's so dang fun. The whole idea I had behind this build was to have a new bike that performed like a new bike but looked vintage. My friend Alex and I went on a trail ride with his 1980 Yamaha IT250 two-stroke, and I rode his bike and then my bike up the toughest hill that we could find. Best I've ever ridden that hill. It's not that bad, especially on a dirt bike. They're not cliffs, they're just kind of like steep parts. Thanks for watching this build, and if you guys think I deserve it, give me a like and a subscribe. I appreciate that. Whee!